Connie Entrekin. I'm the international president of S.O.A.R, which is the Steelworkers Organization of Active Retirees. We have about 80,000 members in the United States and Canada. I've been a union member for 51 years. I joined the Steelworkers Union in 1959. I became secretary of my local union, shop steward, president. I was elected in 1970 to the president of the Gadsden Labor Council. In 1973, I was elected to the executive vice president of the Alabama AFL-CIO. And then in 1977, I went to work full-time for the United Steelworkers as a staff representative. I became the legislative director and PAC director for the Steelworkers in District 36, and I became the assistant to the international president in 1996. I became a director of the district in 2003, and then in 2007 I became assistant to the international president, Leo Gerard. And in 1978, I became president of the S.O.A.R group. Well, what really got me involved in the local union, the company tried to fire me. And of course, the first place I went was to my my departmental representative who represented me. And that's how I got involved. It became an issue that if I was going to work for Republic Steel Corporation, I'd better be active in the local union. So I became a departmental representative, and then later on became the zone commitment, which covered the whole section of the plant that I worked in, and then vice president of my local union, and then finally president. In 1969, I became a member of the negotiating committee for the Republic Steel group in Pittsburgh. Of course, one of the issues in the steel mill during the 60s was also an issue in the public life, and that was the integration of the steel mill jobs in the plant. We had a dual line of progression in the steel mill. African Americans were in one line of progression, and the whites were in the other line of progression. The white line of progression could carry you all the way up to millwright or crafts into the craft jobs. The African American line of progression, you can only get up to about a helper's job. You can never become an operator. You can never become a maintenance person. You were stuck in those line of progression. So the union was fighting to get that changed throughout the 60s, and it was only into the 70s when the consent decree was entered into between the major steel industry and the United Steelworkers that opened up those line of progressions for the African American steel worker in the plants. The biggest challenge was to implement probably the PACE merger, because we had two groups of staff from the Steelworkers Union and from the PACE Union that we had to integrate into service in all the local unions. We started out before the merger. District 9 had 40,000 members. After the merger, we had 80,000 members, over 80,000 members. And we had to take the staff from both those unions and have PACE staff serves in steelworker locals and steelworker staff service in PACE locals. So it worked out tremendous. We couldn't ask for a better situation than that these two unions came together almost immediately. The most admired union leader, there's a lot of them. In fact, I don't know of a union leader that I've ever met that I didn't admire, that didn't have something. Probably the one I admired most coming out of an industrial union was John L. Lewis of the mine workers, because anyone that comes out of an industrial union owes probably their livelihood to John L. Lewis. He is the one that sent Phil Murray out and spent $500,000 back in the 1930s to organize the steel industry. And Phil Murray organized the steel industry, and then from there the other industries fell in, and John L. Lewis was the number one person that built the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organization. So I guess as an industrial union person, John L. Lewis I admired him quite a bit. Phil Murray, our first international president of steelworkers, was one I admired. Just about everyone that I've worked with, and I've worked with a lot. In fact, I was thinking the other day, other than Phil Murray with the Steelworkers Union, I have been a member of or worked with every single international union president of the steelworkers. So they all were my heroes, and I tried to learn something from each and every one of them. Probably, the largest strike that I was involved in the steel industry was, in fact, the reason I was hired was in May of 1959 when I was hired. The companies were preparing for a strike in July of '59, and our customers, or the customers of the steel mills, were stockpiling steel. They were renting warehouses and everything to stockpile the steel. So there was an increase in employment in April and May of '59, and that's when I went in. In July of '59, we struck the 11 or 12 major steel companies in the country. We were out for over 4 months in that strike. And that strike, which a lot of folks don't remember, is that it was not over economics. It was over a clause in the contract, which in the U.S. Steel Agreement was what we call 2B, which was a past practice clause, which said if a company had continued to do a certain practice over a period of time, then it became part of the collective bargaining agreement. And that big thing was crew sizes. If the company had used a crew of 4 for several years, then they could not cut that crew to 3. They had a practice. So the strike of 1959 was actually over 2B, and the cry of the steelworkers during that time was 2B or not 2B, and that was what the strike was all about. Well, just the way that this country was founded, and the things that has happened to the working class in this country, especially since the 1980s. And up until 1980, we had 22 million people working in the industrial section in manufacturing in this country. We're down to 10 or 11 million now. We've lost that many manufacturing jobs in this country, and had it not been for organized labor, we'd lost a lot more. It was organized labor that has kept on trying to enforce, even though the unfair trade policies of this country, we're trying to enforce those and get stronger policies passed. But there's always a need, whether it's the layoffs of where seniority counts, whether health care counts, whether safety and health counts, whatever the problem is, labor unions are there to help. And I don't care, anyone that works for someone else, that draws a paycheck from some other company, then that person needs a union. Somewhere down the line, they need a union. Probably the worst thing that's happened to me is in the union was when my plant closed. When the Republic Steel plant in Gadsden closed, I had 5 generations of my family had worked in that plant, and the 5th one being my son. My grandfather worked in there during World War I. My grandfather worked in there in the 30s and 40s. My father worked in there up through 1974 when he retired with 44 years of service. I worked there, my son worked there, and now that's gone. We've lost over 1,600 middle-class jobs in that plant alone, and it's the only reason that plant's not here today is because of the unfair labor, foreign trade policies that this country has, and it's got to change. And unions are the only ones that can do that. And I think the future of our country is going to rely on trade unions to do exactly what they have to do in the trade business. I talk to my grandchildren quite often about the labor movement because I am convinced that the young people of today is going to be the trade unions of tomorrow, and the children of today needs to know what is happening and why it's happening. They need to be educated in the fact that Wall Street meltdown didn't happen because of trade unions. In fact, you go back and look at the number of manufacturing jobs that we lost in this country. We lost a lot because in labor jobs in this country during that meltdown. But a lot of non-union, low-paying non-union jobs were gone, and that was because they could not compete with the cheapest labor in the world across the seas. So the young people today need to know that need to belong to an organization that believes in the middle class, that believes in the working people, and that will stand up and fight for those causes, not just here in this country, but around the world.